yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But I have these slides all the way through, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
Can you see Andy in the dark here?
Go on. Yep, absolutely
Yep.
I can. You look good.
Do you want to get a flashlight and just kind of beam it on my face? Yeah,
Put a
yeah,
spotlight on that with my.
yeah.
This is pretty good, actually. I can see everything. You're a little dark, but.
A little dark, and as long as I kind of stand semi behind the pulpit here, it'll work.
You want to put a flashlight on?
Well, let's see what happens. Does that do anything?
Kind of the ghost
That
thing.
ghostly, that's not the look we want.
They don't need to see my face. They can see the.
Yeah. That's good. Yep, I think you're good to go, guys.
What's the time on the thing? 9?
8:59, yep.
It's so funny, Charlie. I really wouldn't have recognized you. I mean, maybe because I've never seen you in anything but deep in sawdust. So, and of course the masks don't help either. But even without the mask, I would have done a double take. How's your wife holding up?
Okay, she broke her ankle.
Oh yeah, I heard all about that.
Yeah, no, she's doing much better. She's still trying to deal with the swelling that's going on, but
Is she
getting around it.
moving around with just a boot or?
Oh, no boot at all.
Oh,
No, she's
great.
in a cast, and so she's out of a cast, and the biggest thing we're dealing with right now is she's having a fair amount of swelling with it. So she has one of the elastic stocking kind of things to help cut down on that swelling. But no, we're doing good.
There it is.
Good, good.
There it is. We've got 3 people watching, and that's where your comments will come in.
Got it. Okay,
Hey,
good.
that looks good.
Okay.
How you doing, buddy?
Good. We all set?
Yep.
Good to go? We live?
Sue. Sound.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Test 1, 2.
Well, this is old.
That's old.
This is
Okay. Okay, that's old.
You can hear this talk.
Okay, that's old.
Yeah. Yeah, it's working.
Someone give me we live?
You are live.
Very good. Well, glad to be with you all. Andy Phillips from Logos Academy, Harrisburg. This is great for me to be with you wherever you is. As some of you may know, we are deeply indebted to Derry and their support of our efforts in Harrisburg with sponsoring our second grade classroom and second graders. Charlie, who's in the room, and his lovely wife put a lot of sweat equity in, as well as a number of other folks. I'll never forget that painting day. It was the hottest day of the summer. Windows are all shut. I walk in, and it looked like everybody had been bathing, just drenched. It was dust and paint. It was, but great. And we deeply appreciate that. It's one of our, we often get compliments about that room, by the way. So kudos to all of you, and thank you so much, Derry Press, for that. Let me pray for us, and then we'll get in a little bit. A lot of this is my story, but also about the school. So want to give you a kind of best snapshot I can, and love for questions, and happy to get with any of you virtually or otherwise. So let me pray. Our gracious God and Father, we're so thankful for doing. So here I am as the assistant to start a kindergarten and first grade class, especially because he really didn't know what he was doing. And it made sense. And as I got to know Harrisburg, one of the great needs in Harrisburg was for early education. There just weren't that many opportunities. Head Start has anywhere from 300 to 500 kids on their waiting list at that time, which continues. And kids, particularly kids coming from lower income households that don't have an early education, tend to start behind and almost never catch up. You'll often hear people talk about a preschool to prison pipeline that's out there. So I went to the board and I said, listen, people aren't giving money, but one of the things I've learned, we need to start a preschool. Folks at the Joshua Group, who I got to know, Kirk Hallett, some others, I think, that are familiar with many of you here at Derry. Kirk said, you just need to do it. And I thought, I have grandkids. I love little kids. How hard can it be to run a preschool? And I'll go volunteer. So I volunteered at a preschool in the city. The super great folks, people that were running it didn't have any formal experience, but they had a deep passion, and that inspired me further. But I'll never forget a conversation with a little gal that was playing. She was 3 years old. She was playing with something not unlike what you see in the screen over my shoulder. And I was kind of joking around with her and asked what was that. And her response to me was, "Dem police, dem bad." Now, this was in 2014. Black Lives Matter, I think, was out there, but not with the prominence that it is today. And it occurred to me that, my 3-year-old granddaughter, I guess I had 2 or 3 of them at the time, would never have said that. Wouldn't even occur to them. Wasn't even on the radar. And it reminded me, it just brought home to me that it is very, very different being a person of color. Very different. There are things that just didn't even cross my radar, given the background that my friend Stanley had mentioned about his parents and family, and then to hear that sort of thing, and just not in the vocabulary. The other big aha moment, and Liz was great, Liz Barna, because she understood that, well, I should back up and talk about my family a little bit. I've got very normal daughters, although I could go a lot of places with that, and normal grandkids, whatever that means. So I always thought when Freddie here would act up, he was just being a bratty 3-year-old, and people just need to tighten up, just need to discipline the guy more. And Liz had a very different response. She calls that, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, she talks about the compassionate classroom. So she handled Freddie very differently than I would. And Freddie, cute little guy, it was astounding to me to watch him, because Freddie had no concept of what it was like to share. He just taking turns, none of those things were a part of his world. And I thought it was a behavior issue. Let's just crack down, more discipline, firmer. And what I realized through Liz and as we was that there was far more going on. Freddie grew up, was in deep poverty, a lot of neglect in his background. We don't know if there was abuse. But there were these traumatic experiences in his life that had and I suspect probably still have a significant impact on his life. Acute childhood experiences, ACEs, you'll sometimes hear it called, the trauma-informed classroom. It's all about the impact of childhood trauma on children. And that trauma can have an impact for the rest of their life, can impact them and does impact physiologically, behaviorally. There's a study done, I found it on the NPR website, study done at Stanford University. It talks about trauma often being changed. He eventually left us. But what's encouraging, and particularly for a school like ours, is that research shows that a caring, safe relationship in early life gives a child a much better shot at growing up healthy, even children that have experienced trauma. And that's very much a part of our culture, very much a part of our impetus for a compassionate classroom, language that Liz has put for us that's super helpful. So we're always asking, not just what do we need to do to get this kid to behave, but what else is going on? What else is going on there? And still boundaries and all those sort of things, but we want to ask more than just, okay, what do we do to get this kid to sit still and pay attention? Because more often than not, there's a lot more going on with that. So I refer to that as the Freddie factor. Freddie was in that opening picture. Liz had him in her arms, and sweet little guy, but had seen a ton of things and been through an awful lot. So the Freddie factor. This one helped me with my coat. This little guy was a hoot, very outgoing, energetic. But one of the things that was fascinating for us was that many of these students, young students, were super self-sufficient, able to take care of themselves, get their coat on all by themselves. We found that students from the more affluent families tended to be more dependent, more needy. We've actually had some of our bigger behavior problems, ironically, with students out of the more affluent families. And I think there's a thought and that people that are poor are lazy and dumb. And that just has not been our experience. We see that in the children. We see it in families. There's one family that I've referred to often, this young mom of four little kids under the age of, when they came to us, I guess 6. And she's got a job. She's getting them to school every day. She's struggling to meet her tuition, but she's meeting it. And she works. She's not lazy. She's hard worker. She's smart. She's made some decisions that have made it a little more difficult for her. But that's something that we have seen repeatedly with our families that are with us. This is was probably the biggest aha moment. I love that picture. I threatened to put a really weird picture of Liz up here, and we've got a bunch of them. And I'd be happy to send those to you upon request, those of you that know her well. This is Miss Liz, who she's affectionately known as. Many of you know her here at Derry. She and her husband and family are here. As I mentioned, she was our lead teacher, lead preschool teacher. I was sort of running big picture. I had a sister in the classroom, and as we've grown, she's our principal. She oversees, trains, guides the teacher, and essentially is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the schools. But twice she's had students say something like this to her: "Miss Liz, you're white. Milk's white." There's somebody else that told her, "Miss Liz, you're really white." And I put that up there with a picture of Tavani, one of our students who's been with us quite a number of years. Great little guy, big personality, but great guy. Is one of the aha moments for me is it dawned on me that I didn't realize I was white. I didn't realize I was white. And that's an interesting thing to say. I showed you my family that's lily white. Any thoughts of what I might mean by that? You've got,
think of race.
What's that?
You don't think of race of yourself or your family.
Yeah, on the right track. I knew the race thing, and there's a sense that I knew, obviously, I was white, not a person of color. Any other thoughts? What do you think I thought about my culture? I thought I was normal. You know, there's other cultures, but then there's my culture that's normal. And it occurred to me through this experience, and probably one of the most helpful things, to recognize that it's not that I don't have a culture, I do, but it's the dominant culture. It's the pervasive culture. It's the culture in which things are defined. And so when it occurred to me that I've got my culture, it's not a better culture. White culture isn't better. It's not worse, or maybe in some cases you might argue that it is, but it's different. And that's been super helpful for me as I look at so many of the racial biases that I've had, so many of the things that have influenced me in my life down through the years. I lived in South Carolina for a number of years, very different culture there, and the race issue there is very different, having been influenced through the Civil War and the perspective on things. The history there was fascinating for me. But that in itself was probably one of the most helpful things for me, to realize that I'm white. I have a strong culture, a strong cultural bias, a lens through which I look at everything. And as I recognize that, recognize my own biases, and recognize how they influence me and my interaction, it's been a helpful tool, and a little bit disturbing, frankly, that I've missed that for so many years, but certainly a lesson that I've learned from our preschool and as we've moved forward. I want to just pause here. Are there any questions that anybody has, or anything I could elaborate more on?
Yeah, if you want to repeat my question, and where do
The question is, where do the students come from? How to get them? I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about where they the makeup. Most of the students come from Harrisburg. Most of it's by word of mouth, and I'll go through a demographic breakdown in just a few minutes. In fact, maybe that's a good lead-in for it. What do we look like? So this little snapshot here gives you an idea. This year, about 90% of our students come from Harrisburg. Most of it's word of mouth. We do a little bit of advertising, not much. We've got a couple families that we've got some cousins and nephews that have come to us. And that's one of our challenges, just getting word out there that we're here and available. So you see the demographic breakdown. About 77% of our student body is at or near poverty. That 185% of the poverty line or below. In 2020, the poverty line for a family of four is $26,200. And our median family this year, this was stats from last year, but our median family income, let's see, how do you do this? Oops, nope, we'll get to her later. There it is. Over here, the median family income last year was $24,900 with a household size of 4. That means that 50% of our families had income that was below $25,000. This year's about 26. So that at least gives you an idea, but it's just word of mouth. Were there any other questions? I'll go on about this. If there's not any other questions or anything I'll elaborate on. Andrew Barn is in the room, so I'll look to him if there's anything I missed or misstated, because his wife will have my head if I foul something up. And I'm actually scared of Liz, but not really. We have a great working relationship. All right, let me just talk about this a few minutes, because this gets at who we're trying to be as a school, what's important to us. One of the things that we have in our bylaws as a school, in this unique Logos model, we are modeled after Logos Academy in York, which has been around 20 years, and I was very familiar with that school. And so when Chris Perrin had mentioned to me about this Christian school in the city and that they were modeled after Logos Academy York, I went, oh, that model's awesome. That's a great Christian school model, and I'll get into why in a minute. It'd be great, and then Harrisburg's a great spot for it. Second City Church has this available space that nobody's using, and that's when he said, well, good, then you ought to do it. But part of what's in our bylaws is that we are required by our bylaws to reserve 65% of our seats for students that come from families that are at or near poverty, 185% of the poverty level or low. Right now, we're at 77%. We're about that this year as well. And we want upper income families, and we believe that as we grow and get a little more established and able to produce a little more data and good metrics and show that'll come. But we believe the socioeconomic and the cultural mix are vital for a healthy learning environment for both sides of the equations. So people coming from poverty and out of a poverty context have a lot to learn from folks that are in upper income settings, but the vice versa is true as well. So we think that's important, and particularly in today's day and age where there's so much tension, class, race, all those sort of things. So we really want to work to see more folks coming from middle and upper income class brackets. So that's one of the things that we'll be working on. You'll see our demographic breakdown is about pretty similar to Harrisburg. Predominance of African American families represented by our student body. I think Harrisburg's about 23% white, and then there's a smaller Hispanic Latino population as well, and that's pretty spot on for today. One of the things you'll see when we talk about some of the marks of us as a school is parent commitment's important, parent partnership. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the cost to educate is $8,200 per student, K through 2. Full tuition is $7,500. Nobody pays that. We scholarship over $6,000 per student, which means last year the average family paid just under $1,000 for a Christian, Christ-centered private school education. And Small class sizes, our average class size this year is 14. We'll max out at 18, will be the largest any class will be. We're keeping it to 15 to leave room for upper income families as they come on board. I mentioned about our median household income, household size. The other thing I like, it gives another level of diversity, is that 50% of our students last year, about 35% this year, those families indicate no religious affiliation. So it adds a whole nother dynamic, a whole nother of diversity to our school. And we like that. We intentionally keep the door open for people coming from any kind of faith background or no faith background at all. 88% of our students live in Harrisburg. That's true this year as well. Any questions about that? Student body this year is about 35. Yeah, Andrew?
So with the no religious affiliation, there's a certain name for the model you guys are? Rather than having the family sign a faith?
Yeah, there's a lot of Christian schools have a faith requirement. They're considered a covenantal school, and we are not. We refer to ourselves as open enrollment. I'll get to that in a minute. But anybody can come. We are pretty clear. We're very clear about what makes up. We describe ourselves as Christ-centered rather than as a Christian school. There's a lot of baggage that goes with the Christian school term. And so we're Christ-centered. So we're very clear with that we pray, we read the scriptures, the kids will memorize the Bible, and that's very much a part and woven through absolutely everything. But we don't require that commitment or a faith statement to be signed off on. The other thing that I'll mention, I can't remember if I mentioned it next slide, but we're also unique as a Christian school. Yeah, I do mention that. So let me pause on that. I'll get to that in a minute. Other questions on this? Anything I missed, Andrew, that you can think of? All right, so one of the other comments we hear often from people that visit us and from our parents is that this school is different. We're different for a lot of reasons. And the first that I've already alluded to is we talk about ourselves as Christ-centered and inclusive. I like using that word inclusive because it's a loaded word, but I think that's important because there are no limits in terms of belief systems, background, family makeup, any of those things. So we're inclusive as a Christ-centered school. We require our staff and our board members to be sincere followers of Jesus, whose faith is consistent with the Apostles' and Nicene Creed. But we don't take stands as a school on things. A lot of Christian schools have stands on everything from questions of sexuality to even the length of days of creation. And we are not that school. We don't take stands there. We tend to be pretty traditional, I'd say, as a staff. But those are things we send home to families to work through with their pastors. And so it's, for some people, that's pretty uncomfortable. But we like that. We like the diversity that it brings. So we have people on staff and on our board from very conservative, evangelical, Pentecostal traditions to folks from mainline Protestant denominations like myself and Liz. So, but Christ-centered and inclusive is important for us. We are unashamedly Christian, and that's a big part of who we are. Secondly, I mentioned those two things. Secondly, culturally diverse. I've mentioned this before. I talked about that in a lot of different ways, but this is an important value for us as a school, that we continue to reflect the diversity of the city that we're in. The fact that we are pretty reflective of that is super encouraging for me. We're classically educated, and this is something that's a little bit different. Many folks haven't heard of something called classical education. It's a pedagogy that I'll talk about in a minute. But I'd like to put this with Liz's phrase, the compassionate classroom. Because those two things, hand in hand, makes, in my opinion, and I think Liz and our staff would agree, really unique pedagogy and culture overall as a school. So the classical approach, the best way for me to put it, is that it coincides with students' developmental stages, recapture the best elements of the past, used for a century, and it builds on the foundation of grammar and then focus on logic, critical thinking, and effective written and oral communication, so that we're teaching children how to think, reason, and learn. And Liz is much better at elaborating on all what that looks like. There's parallels, and we try to keep it holistic, so when we're talking about the history of Egypt, that's reflected in all the classes in some form or another. And the compassionate classroom added to this is just one caring adult that is deeply focused and focused on an individual child can have a significant impact in pushing back against the effects of trauma. And so we want that. We want every child to know that they are known and loved, they are seen, and they're valued, and we recognize what they bring. So I think that's crucial for us. Let me pause there. Is there any questions about that? Anybody online have any questions? Okay, good. And again, I'm happy to elaborate and talk further. Second thing I'll talk about, or next thing I'll talk about, next distinctive for us, is collaborative family partnerships. And I intentionally have a misspelling in this slide just to see if you're paying attention. Liz thought I didn't notice that, but I did. And this is why I'm not in the classroom, by the way. So in any case, this is a huge value for us, because we're not just a drop-off school. We're not just about the kids. We're about the families as well. So we want to be deeply invested in the families' lives. We work hard to earn their trust. We work hard to build relationships. We are predominantly white staff, and most of our families are people of color. There's a lot of distrust it takes to build, and I'd say we've done from my perspective, I think most of our families would say that we've done a good job of earning their trust, earning their respect, and support. So, but we also expect our families to be invested. We have their students for just a short period of time, and if we don't have a family that's invested in the education of their child, then it's just not going to work. It's going to magnify the impact of our students. So we expect our families, and not just paying tuition, and for some $1,000 a year is a pretty big challenge. But our families are doing it. They're resourceful. They're finding ways to do that. But we also expect them to respond to teachers' emails, to follow up on things, to be responding to communications, to meeting with our teachers, to implementing recommendations, to giving us feedback. Our families know their children obviously better than we do. So how can we work together to make this education that much more valuable? And we've made some hard recommendations to families. We made early on, a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, there were two siblings in the same class, one about 10 months apart, and we went to this family and said, we really think it'd be best if the youngest stays in kindergarten, I think it was at the time. That took a lot of trust for the family to trust us, trust Liz, trust the staff to make that move. And they did, and it's really paid off. We've seen behavior change, a significant behavior change, because the younger guy's placed right. And when you're placed right, the behavior tends to. But that took trust. And we've had to do that a couple times. And so we've got to work hard. We expect our families to be at meetings, to attend parent-teacher meetings. And generally, that's worked out pretty well. I will say we've unenrolled students, and it's almost never for behavior issues, almost never. We've had a couple students where I've had some significant things going on that is a small private school funded primarily by donors we just can't handle. But it's almost always because parents just won't partner with us, just won't respond to teachers, won't bring their kids to school, those kind of things. We'll do everything, bend over backwards. We've had parents that haven't been able to make tuition payments, and we'll work with them. We'll make that happen. We'll find tuition for them. And So that partnership, I can't stress enough, is vital for us as a school. The last thing that makes us different, I don't know, in and of itself perhaps not, but very community-minded. In building community as a school, but also in the community in which we're a part of, Midtown Harrisburg. We really want to be a part of that community, be known in that community. We'd love for that to be our permanent home. We're still praying. There was a building option that popped up that may or may not come back up, but we would love to find a permanent home at some point perhaps. But in the meantime, our home is great, and we're looking down the road to continue to grow, continue to add a grade a year as we grow. But that's an important value. Any questions at this point, Andrew?
Andy, do you want to say a few things about the kind of limitations of the physical space you have?
Yeah, a couple. We're in a building that was built in the 1900s. Well, actually, the building we're in the education wing of Second City Church, top floor. Some of you have been there, and we have taken large classrooms, divided them up. We've spruced them up, and as I mentioned, with Charlie and company, have done a great job with that. We are limited, so we've got 35 students this year. Full enrollment next year with our pre-K up and running, and third grade will be 72 students. We've got 2 girls' stalls and 1 boys' stall and a couple urinals. That's in a building that was built in the 50s. The plumbing takes a beating, and we've had a couple leaks already, but there are just some limitations there. There's some spaces that we could get to that we're looking at for next year in that building. We think on that floor it'd be awfully tough to squeeze a class, but we're looking at some other space in the building. I've talked to the pastoral staff there about those options. But there are some challenges. We are, and you'll see in a minute, maybe it's a good cue. Is that it? Yeah. Andrew, you're sort of like, you're like a plant. So this is our vision. So Logos Academy Harrisburg our vision is that we be a thriving, diverse, Christ-centered urban school, preschool through 8th grade, that cultivates well-educated, virtuous students who have developed a love for learning and service. That's our vision. So we've added a grade every year since we started. We want to continue to do that. We'd like to be a school all the way up through 8th grade. We'll make those decisions as we approach that. There's some natural breaking points. We'll likely pause at 5th grade. There's some certainly building limitations that we're going to be facing as we get down the road, and those are on our radar, trying to think through how we can do that and do that well. We really want to stay where we are in Midtown. It's a great spot for us. As you saw, our mission, part of our mission is that we really want to be reaching the majority of students coming from lower income families, but we also want the upper income families, and Midtown's a great spot for that. Easy reach of folks, lower income, but also that's the urban professionals are all around us in Midtown, so we think that's a great spot for us. So we really hope that we can meet that, but the space will continue to be a challenge every year, and we're looking for creative ways to address that. So, questions? Yeah. Those schools and help our students. Our culture is unique, as I trust you've heard this morning, and so that creates challenges because many of the schools around us have just be a very different culture. Private schools be a very different culture. For us, yeah. Yes?
Empty girl, are you going to be looking to recruit teachers of color?
Oh, yeah. The question was, as you grow, are you going to be looking for teachers of color? Yeah, we definitely need people that don't look like. Great challenge. Our staff is a white staff in an urban setting, primarily people of color. It's pretty typical of many, many urban schools. And so to find that, you have to be pretty intentional, work hard. Our model's unique, but that's something that's on our radar now, particularly for our upper level staff. I'm old, so I'm in my mid-60s, so I won't be around all that long. Don't have any plans to go anywhere at this point, but in my role, finding someone that doesn't look like me would be ideal. But great question. Thanks. Yeah.
That's also one that just came in. Talk about the diversity of your board and your staff. Do you see it as a goal to aim for more racially and ethnically diversity, which I think you just spoke to.
Yeah,
more or less.
yeah. The question was our board and staff. We do have a board. I know we have an African-American board member who's been helpful. But yeah, that's something that we just need to be more intentional. Posting on Indeed for filling positions just isn't going to land us the people we need, but working in our immediate community and finding those leads is where we're going, yeah. And that's a challenge for us. We've got a couple more minutes, so I want to just take a few minutes and just talk about how we operate and our income, and then I'll take other questions. And again, I'm happy to dialogue offline. If you'd like to talk further with me, reach out to the church office. They can connect you with me. If you know the Barna household, if you've seen them, you can reach out to me. Here's our school income. This is how we operate. We're a private independent school. We receive no state funding. We're not a charter school. The state considers us a registered, non-licensed religious day school. That's how we are registered with the state. So there are state things that we have to adhere to and that sort of thing. But 50% of our income, of our annual budget, this year it's about $330,000, comes through individual donors. The other part of that is about 12% last year came through the tax credit. Pennsylvania has this great program where you can donate to an approved organization like ours, and 90% of that donation will be credited against your state tax bill. Not deduction, but a credit. And that's a great program that is a great source of funding. 18%, yeah. Now, individuals can do that. Great question. If you have a high enough tax liability, I think your tax liability needs to be about $3,500 to do that. There's a special entity set up. You can work through that, and that donation will go directly to us. And I'd be happy to talk further about with anybody who'd like to explore that further. 18% of our income is tuition, and then 20% is grants. And ideally, in an ideal world, that ought to be 25, 25, 25, and 25, but it's not an ideal world. So we've only had 1 year we finished in the red, and that was the first year we were $1,000 in the red, but every other year, even last year, we finished in the black. And we're doing pretty well this year financially. We're encouraged, but I have on my bulletin board in front of me a little sticky note that Cindy, our admin assistant, put on my desk one morning. $15.02, and at one point that was our bank balance, and yet through the generous support of our donors and funds have come in, and we're still operational. So there's numerous stories like that. Just been really encouraging. The photo in this slide I wanted to show you because one of the things that's been that enables us to do what we do is having volunteers. Volunteers like Charlie and Marilyn. Marilyn's been volunteering in the office. Volunteers have painted. But Joy's been volunteering with us. I think this is our third year. She comes in 1 day a week and is there all day wherever she needs to help. I like to point her out. A lot of times I'll meet with folks and they know that I'm meeting with them because they think I want their money. And that's true. A school does. We'd certainly love to have those donations. Her family for years has donated just $25 a month. But I like to highlight her and her husband Jim as our rock star donors. Because that $25 a month is also what it's looked like is her day a week that she's given. It's her husband's investing his time out of his business. He sent his marketing intern. He hired this marketing intern to work for him, who in turn donated 10 hours of his time to work with us. She's there every week. She's opened her home to have dessert nights where we've met and made connections with other folks that have turned out to be some of our biggest investors. So I tell people the way we operate is through our donors, but that donor investment looks very, very different for people. And it's not just a dollar amount, but it's investing of time and skill set that's been super helpful. I think we're just about near the wrap-up time. I have time. Any questions out there? Okay, very good. Well, it's been a pleasure for me to be with you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this opportunity. I've got some faces in the room. I don't know if they're smiling or not because everybody's got their masks up, so I appreciate that. But I appreciate Derry so much and the investment and taking your faith seriously enough to invest in the kinds of things that we're doing and make what we're doing work. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.